As we age, we all undergo changes. Some are physical, while others are mental or emotional. Most of us have heard the phrase, aging gracefully. But let's face it, not everyone ages as elegantly as we might hope. There are things that happen in old age that many people notice but don't talk about. Partly because they don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, and partly because it's uncomfortable to address. Today, let's dive into 15 of the ugly things that people in old age do that everyone notices, yet no one wants to say anything about. It's time to face reality with a candid look at what happens as we get older, with facts and stories to help paint the full picture. The first ugly thing we often see in older adults is their tendency to stop taking care of themselves. We all know how important personal hygiene is, not just for our health, but for our self-esteem. Yet as we get older, this often becomes one of the first things to slip. Personal care routines may fade away, and people may stop brushing their teeth as frequently, taking regular showers, or maintaining their appearance. This decline in self-care isn't just about vanity. It can signal deeper issues like depression or physical limitations. A case study of an elderly woman named Dorothy highlights this well. Dorothy was once a proud woman, always dressed to the nines, her hair styled impeccably. But as she entered her late 70s, her daily routine of self-care began to slip. Her children noticed that she had stopped brushing her hair and was often found sitting in dirty clothes, neglecting basic hygiene. While it wasn't something anyone wanted to bring up, the signs were clear. Dorothy was struggling with her mental health, and it showed in her physical appearance. It's not that she didn't care anymore. It's that the effort became overwhelming. Another ugly aspect of aging that no one likes to talk about is how people become more set in their ways. Older individuals, particularly those over 80, often develop rigid routines and habits that are difficult for others to understand. They have been doing things a certain way for decades, and as time passes, they become less inclined to change, even when the world around them does. A man named Harold, who was 82, refused to use a cell phone. He didn't want to learn, didn't want to change. His kids tried to explain how texting could make life easier and safer, but he was adamant. "Why fix what isn't broken?" he'd say, his voice sharp with frustration. It wasn't that Harold was inherently difficult, it was just that he felt comfortable in his old ways. The problem is that this inflexibility often leads to isolation. Harold would often find himself left out of family events simply because he refused to embrace modern technology, which could have helped him stay connected. The ugliness of stubbornness in old age is evident in how it separates people from the very things that can keep them young at heart. Something else that's common but rarely discussed is how older adults sometimes become overly dependent on others. While needing help as we get older is inevitable, the degree to which some individuals rely on their children or caregivers can be overwhelming. Take Ruth, a 78-year-old woman whose children felt as though they were on call 24/7. Ruth had grown accustomed to her children's constant presence, calling them for even the smallest of tasks, such as reaching a can on a high shelf. The dependency wasn't rooted in any medical need. Rather, it was a learned behavior. Ruth had become so accustomed to being waited on hand and foot that she didn't know how to function without constant attention. It became a burden, not just for her children, but for Ruth herself, who lost the ability to do simple tasks she once could do on her own. It's an uncomfortable truth. While aging brings its fair share of challenges, some people exacerbate the problem by refusing to maintain their independence. This dynamic of dependency can lead to frustration and resentment. Yet it's rarely addressed because people don't want to offend the elderly. As people age, their patience tends to wear thinner. While this is natural to some extent, after all, life can be tiring, it can also manifest in ways that strain relationships. Take the case of Thomas, a 70-year-old man who had always been a kind, patient soul. But in his later years, Thomas found himself snapping at his family for the smallest things. His daughter Emily was visiting one day when she accidentally spilled a glass of water on the floor. Normally, Thomas would have brushed it off, but this time he exploded. "Why can't you be more careful? I've asked you 100 times," he shouted. Emily was shocked by his outburst, as this was a side of her father she had never seen before. It wasn't just the occasional moment of frustration, it was a pattern. Aging seemed to rob him of his patience, turning him into a much more irritable version of himself. It's painful to witness a person change in this way, but it's a reality many families face. The loss of patience can affect not just the individual, but everyone around them. Another thing that happens in old age is that many older adults begin to get a little more selfish. They might not intend to, but the shift often occurs as they feel they have earned the right to put their needs first. This can manifest in subtle ways, such as demanding more attention or expecting others to accommodate their preferences, even when it's inconvenient. Consider Sarah, a 75-year-old woman who insisted on having dinner at exactly 6 p.m. every evening, no matter what. She expected her family to drop everything to meet her schedule. Her son James found it increasingly difficult to keep up with her demands, but Sarah wasn't understanding. She would frequently comment, "I've lived my life, now it's time for you to adjust to me." While Sarah had certainly earned the right to enjoy her golden years, her selfishness made it hard for others to connect with her in the same way. This isn't a universal rule, but it's a common behavior that comes with aging. People sometimes feel they are entitled to more, even if it means stepping on others' toes. Old age also brings about a loss of filter. Older adults often speak their minds more freely than they used to, and while this can be refreshing in some cases, it can also be hurtful. Take the example of George, a 79-year-old man who never hesitated to offer unsolicited opinions. "That outfit makes you look older than you are," he once told his niece. "You should really consider getting a facelift. It'll make you look so much better." His niece was taken aback by his comment. She hadn't asked for his advice, and certainly not in such a blunt manner. But George's lack of a filter became more pronounced as he aged. He had stopped caring about social niceties, thinking that since he was older, people should just accept whatever came out of his mouth. While some might admire his honesty, many found his remarks rude and hurtful. This loss of tact is often overlooked, but it can cause lasting damage to relationships. Then there's the way aging affects memory. Everyone knows that forgetfulness is a natural part of getting older, but the extent to which it affects some people can be alarming. Take Linda, a 68-year-old woman who had always been sharp, but in her mid-60s, she started forgetting things more frequently. Dates, appointments, and even the names of people she had known for years. At first it was a mild inconvenience, but as time went on, Linda's forgetfulness became more troubling. She would repeat the same stories multiple times during a conversation, not realizing she had already shared them. Her children were patient at first, but over time it became difficult to watch Linda struggle with this decline. Forgetting important details is one thing. Forgetting how to have a meaningful conversation is something else entirely. It's a painful reminder of how aging can steal even the most cherished faculties. Aging also brings with it a tendency to become overly nostalgic. While reminiscing about the past can be comforting, sometimes it becomes an obsession. Take the case of Helen, a 72-year-old woman who constantly talked about the good old days. Every conversation seemed to circle back to the past, with Helen recounting stories of how things used to be. While this wasn't necessarily a bad thing, it became difficult for her friends and family to engage with her. They wanted to talk about their current lives, their challenges, and the future. But Helen was stuck in a time that had long passed. The obsession with the past can make it hard for others to connect with the present, and it can prevent older adults from enjoying the present moment. Another common issue that arises in old age is a lack of awareness about one's own limitations. As we grow older, it is natural to want to maintain independence and continue living life as we always have. However, the reality is that both physical and mental abilities often deteriorate with age, sometimes in subtle ways. This decline can make it difficult for individuals to recognize that they can no longer do certain tasks as easily or safely as they once could. One of the most common ways this manifests is through an overestimation of one's capabilities, which can lead to risky and dangerous situations. Take the case of Charles, an 84-year-old man who had been driving for decades without issue. Charles had always prided himself on being self-sufficient, and despite the fact that his vision had been deteriorating over time, he refused to admit that he was no longer fit to drive. His family members noticed that he had begun to struggle with basic tasks, such as reading street signs or seeing traffic lights clearly, but every time they gently suggested he stop driving, he would brush off their concerns. Charles was adamant that he was still fine and could manage on his own. He couldn't bear the thought of losing his independence, so he continued driving, convinced that his ability hadn't changed. One afternoon, while Charles was driving to the grocery store, he failed to notice a car stopped in front of him at a red light. Unable to judge the distance properly, he rear-ended the vehicle, causing a minor accident. Thankfully, no one was seriously injured, but the shock of the incident left Charles shaken. His family was horrified not only because of the accident itself, but also because it highlighted just how unaware Charles had become of his own limitations. The crash served as a wake-up call for both Charles and his family. The incident forced him to confront the fact that his decline had reached a point where he could no longer safely operate a vehicle. Unfortunately, this scenario is not unique. It is all too common for elderly individuals to either deny or fail to recognize their limitations, particularly when it comes to tasks that are integral to their independence. Whether it's driving, walking, or even climbing stairs, many elderly people continue to push themselves beyond what their bodies are capable of handling. This reluctance to accept the reality of aging not only puts their own safety at risk, but also the safety of others around them. It's a delicate balance, wanting to preserve independence while also acknowledging the need for help and adjusting to the changes that come with aging. In short, aging is a journey that comes with its challenges. While many aspects of old age are beautiful and full of wisdom, there are undeniably ugly truths that people don't always want to talk about. These include a decline in self-care, stubbornness, dependency, impatience, selfishness, a loss of filter, forgetfulness, nostalgia, and a lack of awareness about personal limitations. These changes may be difficult to witness, but they are a part of life. It's important to address them openly to help those who are aging navigate the challenges with grace and dignity, and to provide support where needed. After all, just because something is uncomfortable to talk about doesn't mean it should remain unspoken. If you found value in this video, don't forget to hit the like button and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel to catch all our latest content. Thanks for watching.